Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, September 9th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about James Talarico in the Senate race in the state of Texas, now making an announcement that he, in fact, is running for office in the 2026 midterm elections. A lot of interesting decisions that have been coming out from a number of Democrats across numerous Senate races. This is arguably the most interesting and most beneficial, might I make that argument, for the Democratic Party as they look to a figure in the state of Texas to take on John Cornyn or Ken Paxton. In the 2026 midterm elections, James Talarico comes in as a fresh face, offering something new to the Democratic Party in this state and to voters across Texas. Now, this announcement is one that we previewed last week. We talked about how Talarico was set to make an announcement this upcoming Tuesday, and at 7 a.m., or roughly 8 a.m. Eastern time, we saw the announcement came forth. Now, the Washington Post broke this story around 5 a.m. Eastern time. I imagine that they had all of this information, was ready to go with it by the time they had reached, needing to do a publication ahead of the formal announcement. But it is really a big decision, and one that does come at a time where Democrats have been looking to the 26th Senate race with only one mainstream candidate, now two. Colin Allred, the former U.S. representative who was from Texas's 32nd district, also a name you might recognize because he ran for Senate back in 2024. But now James Talarico entered into the fray, makes this race ultimately a two-way race right now on the Democratic primary side, with potential entrances into the race, so it seems, from Joaquin Castro and Beto O'Rourke, but those have not yet been confirmed. And so looking at Texas in terms of why this is truly, I think, a big bump for Democrats in this state is largely because they have been looking for a candidate who can take on Ken Paxton, who has a track record, but not one that has an electoral loss looming behind them. And of course, in 2024, Colin Allred did outperform expectations in outpacing Kamala Harris across the state by roughly 7 points. But thinking about the final margin against Ted Cruz, it is not unrealistic or unfair to have Democrats across Texas and voters in Texas too look for something different in the 2026 midterms. And James Talarico can offer exactly that. Thinking about the general election, the reason why there's been all this conversation as well about who might be running isn't just because people are infatuated and interested in Democratic primaries. Maybe we are because, I'm making the video, you're watching it. That might be the type of stuff, that you are really want to talk about. But a big reason why Texas is at this forefront of a lot of conversation with redistricting and the Senate race today is because Texas is seen as an opportunity for Democrats for the first time in a very long time. Going into the 2026 Senate race, believe it or not, despite Texas being a state that is quite conservative, Republicans have not won Texas by double digits on the Senate level since 2014. Not in 2024, not in 2020, certainly not in 2018. You have to go back to the last time there was a red wave year to find a margin of victory of anything over the margin that we saw for John Cornyn in 2020, which was shy of 10 percentage points. In 2024, however, Donald Trump won this state by 14 points. The race on the Senate side, with a lackluster Republican and Colin Allred as the Democrat, you found that the margin there did in fact narrow, and quite tremendously. If Texas had been a swing state, Democrats would have won it. But in 2026, it's a lot closer to being the possibility of a swing state, and one that Democrats are looking to with Talarico at the top as an opportunity for them to win. Because Talarico has a story to tell, and he has one that has been quite compelling online for the past 6 months to a year. The Democrats are hoping can really be utilized and leveraged in the 2026 cycle. And taking a look at what we've seen so far, the primary is quite competitive. Now, in a multi-way race, it really could be a massive, massive election. But of those who have declared thus far, Talarico and Allred are seemingly narrowing in on each other. Arguably, though, the margins have always been close from the first time Texas Southern University did that poll back early on in August, finding Allred with a 7-point lead on James Talarico. In Public Policy's most recent polling, we've seen that they show Allred with an 8-point lead, and Talarico is right, referring to himself as the underdog. He doesn't come into this as the immediate favorite in the Democratic primary, but it certainly is shaking things up quite tremendously. Because Allred has been announced for quite some time. He made this decision that he was going to be, in fact, running for Senate a while back, and pretty much had indicated that from right after his loss in 2024 that he wanted to return. But on this side, Talarico, who some people actually expected might run for governor, we saw some speculation around that before, now making the decision to run for Senate. This is very obviously, I think, the right choice. Oftentimes, politicians, I think, run for things that are that they are less electable. But I do think that in this case, this is absolutely the one. Greg Abbott is a tried and tested incumbent. He's probably not going down in 2026, and chances are that that race will be much more difficult for Democrats than a Senate race, especially against, and this is the other piece of the puzzle here for Democrats, against Attorney General Ken Paxton, who right now still maintains an advantage in GOP primary polling. And so Ken Paxton is a name that you also might recognize. He's under fundraised in comparison to John Cornyn, but a much more well-received name across the MAGA base in the state of Texas, because John Cornyn, as much as he has been in the Senate longer than Donald Trump has been running for president, he's not as well liked as Donald Trump or Ken Paxton, and not as seen as loyal to Donald Trump, which to Republican primary voters is the whole gambit. And so looking at what has been happening here, there has been a very, very clear contested primary from the beginning. Data from 2022, then 2023, then 2024 and 2025 all tell us that Ken Paxton and John Cornyn were seemingly gearing up against each other in a Senate race in 2026 and likely to contest each other in the GOP primary. And Ken Paxton, who's been able to maintain this lead, has seen a little bit of it shrink after numerous scandals have come out against him, after being impeached by the Republicans in the Texas House of Representatives, X, Y, and Z. But even after it all, the most recent survey shows that Ken Paxton maintains this advantage. And Echelon Insights says the same thing. And for someone who has raised less money than John Cornyn, has not been an incumbent, is looking at this as an outsider, he is on track likely to win this GOP primary, which would do a lot of damage to the GOP and set up a candidate like Talarico to have a very good chance at victory in the Senate race. And so thinking about, what we've seen develop in Texas in previous cycles where the races might be competitive, I think back to 2024, which we've talked about in brief, but I think about how that race was largely one where Democrats were looking for a candidate who could take on Ted Cruz. And although they did lose this race by 8.5 points, you have to keep in mind, too, that running alongside a presidential ticket is tremendously difficult. That's why 2026, if there was a moment to strike, would be the time at which Democrats get to a point where Texas could be within range. They don't start out as the favorites, but they certainly should not be counted out. And thinking about 2018, I think is a better example. A state that voted for Trump by 10 in 2016, voted for Romney by 16 in 2012, voted for John Cornyn in 2014 by 27 points. 4 years later, Ted Cruz is on the ballot. Incumbent senator and had been elected for the first time in 2012. In 2018, runs against Beto O'Rourke and wins by just 2.6%. This was one of the closest races we've seen in the Texas Senate races in a very long time. And looking at Beto O'Rourke as someone, who had been in this race for a while, the expectations were clear. It was either lean or likely Republican. Only the Cook Political Report had it as a toss-up. And a lot of races that were far closer than this, and in fact, some cases more conservative than this, were expected to be even more, lopsided. When you take a look at the predictions in North Dakota, it shared a characterization to that of Texas, but North Dakota was a double-digit victory and Texas was low single digits. A better example is Missouri, where we saw Josh Hawley defeat Claire McCaskill, but almost everybody had it as a toss-up. Indiana, where Mike Braun defeated Joe Donnelly, but almost everybody had it as a toss-up. Right in Tennessee, where Marsha Blackburn defeated Phil Bredesen, almost everybody had it as either lean or a toss-up, but it still went to the GOP by 11. Texas, however, which had a more locked-in and solid characterization for Republicans than in Tennessee, Missouri, Indiana, North Dakota, all states that voted to the right of Texas. And yet in 2018, and again, that is the reason why it was so shocking, because it exposed the vulnerabilities of the GOP when you find massive amounts of support turning away from Republicans and Donald Trump and towards the Democratic Party, combined with the maintenance of strong and dominating margins amongst key demographic groups specific to Texas, like Hispanic voters. And in this state in 2018, it showed that with the right national environment and the right circumstances and the right Democratic candidate for the time, Democrats can really narrow up Texas. And even though Beto O'Rourke came up short, he again exposed that Texas, in some time in the future, is within reach for Democrats. It may not be 2018 as it wasn't, and it wasn't 2024. But you look to the future and figure out, okay, wait a second. This is something that's possible. This is something that clearly, under a 2018 style wave, if Democrats can outpace that by 3 in Texas, which again seems very difficult, but Ken Paxton, I think, is a far weaker Republican nominee for Senate than Ted Cruz, then that race will be quite interesting. Because 2026 for Democrats largely hinges on who Republicans nominate. But also, too, who they nominate matters as well. And I do believe that of the list that we've seen here, Talarico comes into this as the clear underdog, sure, but someone who offers a new, younger, and restored vision, I think, for the Democratic Party in Texas that could be the key, if there was one, to winning a Senate race in Texas. Because Democrats tried it in 18, and they tried it in 24, and they weren't able to come through. But in 2026, it is certainly worth looking at, and worth looking at into the degree that this Senate race might be center focus. Let's say Ken Paxton wins that primary on March 3rd. This race drops down immediately to lean and potentially toss-up, because that's how bad of a Republican nominee he is. John Cornyn isn't untouchable, and this primary will very much be the one that nips it in the bud, if that is the case. But as it stands right now, some very interesting information out of Texas, some very interesting announcements, and what that we are seeing now is that a lot of key and top recruits across numerous Senate races, and now Texas has theirs. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.